All right, I think we're getting ready to get started. So thanks for being here and being a part of this. We have our friends from Milligan, really our friend from Milligan, Josh Little, is with us. So thank you so much. We around here at First Christian Church love Milligan and what they do, and Emmanuel as well, which is a seminary that is connected with Milligan. And not only are they good friends of DHF, but they're great friends of First Christian Church as well, and we appreciate that a lot. They did something right with our lead pastor, so Milligan right himself. So thank you for spending time with us. He's going to share us about what's coming next, or who's next, really. So you have the wisdom. I'm just supposed to set you up. So would you welcome Josh Little, please?
Hey everybody, it's great to be here with you. As Adam shared, my name's Josh. I work at Milligan University. Any of you been to Milligan? Heard of Milligan? All right, I am going to give you a primer on Milligan. Does that sound okay? Because I want you to know about Milligan freely. So a little bit about Milligan. Milligan is a Christian liberal arts university that seeks to honor God by educating men and women to be servant leaders. And we do that in a whole bunch of different ways. If you were to show up at Milligan, we have about 1,200 students across 100 different academic programs. So we're a Christian school that has engineering and nursing and counseling and business folks and ministry. Those are the folks that I work with at our university. Ministry folks are a portion of the students that are at Milligan. But for us, at our core, we want to train people who love Jesus and love the church and are going into a whole bunch of different professions to make an impact in the world. And so I would encourage you, if you get a chance, to come to Tennessee's Fair Eastern Mountains. Anybody here in Tennessee? You guys have heard of Gatlinburg, right? Okay, all right. When you come to Dollywood to come to Gatlinburg, make a little detour in from the Milligan because you're going to love it. I've got a picture here. You guys see? Everybody go, ooh. Yeah. So that is Cedar Chapel right there. That building is where I had a call to ministry. When I was 17 years old, I showed up. I'm from central Indiana, and I showed up to a CIY. It's this youth conference at Milligan, and I was sitting in the back row of Cedar Chapel, and they had a moment where the preacher stood on stage and said, "Hey, I know some of you in this room are called to ministry. If that's you, I want you to come forward." And I remember as a 17-year-old, just kind of like just feeling this call from God in my life. It just felt like the hand of God was on me. And I went forward to the front of the stage and had this crazy spiritual moment with Jesus. And from there, it really changed my life. I attended Milligan. I attended our seminary Emmanuel. Did ministry for about 8 years as a student minister. And then about 8 years as a executive pastor at a church in Ohio. And then in 2023 came to Milligan to work on our staff. Here's some pictures of some of my students. Sam Sosby, who you'll see on the bottom right, is a graduate of Milligan, just graduated last weekend. He is going to be a preacher, which is pretty cool. But I would encourage you guys to come and see Milligan for all that it is. If you have young people in your church that are interested in ministry, if you have folks that are shifting careers and they're interested in pursuing an MDiv or a higher education or a doctoral degree, please, after our session, come talk to me because I would love to talk with you about all the amazing things about Milligan, but I also don't want this just to be a commercial about Milligan, right? We have a topic to talk about today, and I want to talk to you about that. I am here because I have a conviction that I want to share with you, and I'm hoping you're here because you have a sense of conviction as well. I want to talk to you about the next generation of leaders for the church. Across all denominations, I mean, all of them, we are seeing a shortage of young people going into ministry. How many of you, raise your hand if you would agree with that? Yeah, okay. Right now, last year, I got over 130 phone calls from churches, just me, asking for ministers. And the amount of undergrad students that we graduated that are studying ministry was 8. And that's just me. Every single week, I talk to churches, get emails, have phone calls from pastors that say, "Could you just send us a great youth pastor?" Or, "I'm getting ready to retire. Do you know anybody who could step into the pulpit?" Or, "Oh my gosh, we need this amazing worship pastor who's incredibly gifted and has the character of Jesus. Could you just send him to us?" And I was like, oh, if only I had enough students to send to our churches. And I'm sure you sense that as well, right? A few stats I want to share with you here. 38% of pastors today, these are all pastors, are considering leading full-time ministry. Those are 50-year-old pastors, 60-year-old pastors, 40-year-old pastors. If you look at millennial pastors, so I'm a millennial, please don't rain on me here, but I'm a millennial. 50% of millennials that are in ministry are considering leading full-time ministry altogether. The average age of a minister within our movement of churches is 54 years old. Now that's all roles, children's, students, worship, 54 years old. And right now there are more pastors that are over the age of 65 than are under the age of 40. Think about that. There is going to be a wave of folks that are being retired from ministry, stepping out of the pulpit. And there's not enough knees, millennial leaders, and there's not enough Gen Z to step in and fill that gap. And so for you, I'm just going to tell you, I'm really passionate about this. I believe this is the most important thing that the church needs to be responding to right now. I believe that. So you might be like, dude, you need to chill out. I am excited about this. I spend most of my time with 17 and 18-year-olds who say, God called me to ministry. And I get to be a part of helping them on that journey, say, okay, what does it mean to be faithful to that call? I get to sit with 18 to 22-year-olds that are studying ministry at Milligan, and they're saying, how do I find my first church, and what does it look like to be in a healthy culture, and how do I handle this conflict with somebody? I get to sit in those moments, and I'm telling you, the future of the church is bright. Amidst all these stats, I'm telling you, the future of the church is bright. So I'm excited, but I'm also passionate about this because I believe that we as leaders in the church, we need to rise up. We need to take ownership of this call. Because if we don't, the church of my children, I have two kids, an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. If we do not step up, the truth is a lot of the churches that are calling Milligan right now, and so many of our other sister institutions asking us for pastors, we're dealing with a real shortage here. I want to share a few Barna stats here. Those are really blurry. Just trust me, they're bad. Not good stuff. That's still blurry and not good. Here's what I really want to get to. Beyond the practical needs, which is me telling you that we're having a shortage. And you can go on Barna and see that we're having a shortage. I think we need to recover our conviction that developing ministry leaders is core to leading in the church. Not a secondary act, not a secondary responsibility, not something that in the midst of everything that goes on throughout the week, everything that goes throughout the year, maybe we'll find someone to develop. No, I believe that being a minister of the gospel, a leader in the church, an elder in the church, means that you are raising up the next generation of leaders. And if we don't recover that part of our identity as the church, there's going to be consequences. We have to develop Gen Z into bold, spirit-led believers who are not just attending church, but are leading the church into the future. Right? Now, I can give you biblical examples, right? Moses and Joshua, Elijah and Elisha. Someone told me I looked a lot like Elisha earlier. Paul and Timothy, right? But there is a heritage within our Christian tradition of men and women who have invested in leaders. And them investing in leaders resulted in leaders who invested in other leaders, who invested in other leaders. But I think we've lost some of that along the way. I just think we have. I want to read this passage from Ephesians to you. It says, this is from Ephesians 4, but to each one of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. So Christ himself gave the apostles and the prophets and the evangelists and the pastors and the teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up, until all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we'll no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. That's our job. As leaders in the church, Doesn't matter if you're an elder, you're a lay leader, you're a minister, you're a student minister. Your job, my job, as someone who has a vested interest in the future of the church, is to say, what am I doing with my time, with my life, with my gifts, to equip the people of God for the works of the gospel? What am I doing to ensure that the kingdom impact of the church for the next 50 years, 100 years, is going to be greater than the 50 years before that? We have to be on the cutting edge of this. I believe, and I'm biased, but let me be biased, I believe the most pressing question for church leaders is, how do we effectively reach, disciple, and send out the next generation of leaders of the church? We get mired with a ton of other questions, and I'm not saying those questions are unimportant. But what I want you to hear is, this question is critical. What are we doing to reach young people who God has a calling on their life? What are we doing to disciple the young leaders in our churches? The second career ministers that could be in our churches? That all they need is affirmation, for us to affirm that call, for us to resource them. What are we doing to ensure that the church of our future has leaders that will lead it forward? Now, here's what this requires. And then I'll get off my soapbox and we'll talk about some information. All right. I believe that this requires three things. If a church is really going to, for the long haul, invest in the future leaders of the church, it requires three things. The first one is conviction. The second one is culture. And the third one is constructs. So, conviction, culture, constructs. I want to define these for you so that you know what I mean. Conviction is this God-initiated passion that fuels a leader in a church. Basically, developing leaders must be this burning passion, a non-negotiable part of the vision of your local church. It is not a negotiable thing. It is not a footnote for your church. It becomes close to the very heartbeat of your church, saying, I as a leader have this passion to see young people, to see folks that are in our church be mobilized. I want to see a catalytic movement in our church of leaders rise up. Culture are the shared beliefs and values that drive behavior of a group of people. The idea is you might have conviction of saying we need to develop leaders. Culture is saying we as a church, we as a group of people, we as a staff, we as elders believe in this. We have a conviction in this. We want to see this happen. And then constructs, and this is going to be, the culture and constructs is what we're going to talk about for a little bit. Constructs are the systems. They're the processes. They're the programs that help take a person who God has a call in their life to be able to say, how do we develop you into the person God wants you to be, the leader God wants you to be? So real quick, I want to just give you a little bit of I work mostly with Gen Z. So I want to tell you about this Gen Z group. Understanding that some of the stuff that we're going to talk about is true, whether it's a person who's 20 or someone who's shifting careers. And they say, hey, I was doing this, and now I want to do ministry. I literally talked to someone a few moments ago who worked for Caterpillar for 30 years, and now they're a pastor. And God had a call in their life. The stuff that we're going to talk about is true for that person as much as it is for the 20-year-old. But I do want you to get a glimpse of Gen Z. Gen Z is born, this is crazy, between 1996 and 2010. Does that make anybody else feel old? I feel old there, right? Gen Z are digital natives, meaning that they spend about 4.8 hours a day on some form of technology or social media. 4.8 hours a day. Gen Z, about 80%, about 79, 80% of them report feeling lonely in some way, right? So they're spending 4.5, 5 hours a day on social media, 80% feel lonely. 83% care to work for an organization that makes them feel like they're making an impact in the world. These are all Barna stats you can go look up. Now you might hear these stats and go, oh my gosh, this is so daunting. It doesn't feel like we have a bright future. But here's one of the cool things about Gen Z. If you get a chance to sit down with folks that are in that window of time, they are not disengaged with Jesus. And honestly, many of them, they're not disengaged with the church. 3/4 of teens want to learn more about Jesus. 2/3 of U.S. teens identify as a Christian. And that's why Barna calls this group of folks the open generation. They are open to what God has for them. And so that I would tell you, like, the reason I see the church being bright in the future is because if you sit down with a 20, 21, 22-year-old, they are open. They are willing. They are excited. It's just being able to cultivate that openness. So here's what I want to talk to you about the rest of the time. I want to share basically a pathway for leaders that you are cultivating to be the future leaders of the church. The first is we're going to talk about how do you reach or find or invite leaders in your church, young leaders in your church, to be mentored and coached and trained. The second is disciple, which I take to mean, what does it look like for you to provide coaching and spiritual mentorship and education and experiences for someone to cultivate that love? You want someone to love Jesus and to love the church more on the other side of spending time with you than they did before, right? So what do we do to cultivate that love? And then the third is to send out. And one of the burdens that we have at Milligan is, especially for early career ministers, it can be a challenge when you get into your first ministry, right? Anybody, I know Cam's all about the amens, amen, right? Like you get in and you go, I thought it was going to be this. It's not what I thought.
Amen.
Right? And so what does it look like to support someone after we've sent them out? How do you, because one of the things that's challenging is not just getting them to go into ministry, but keeping them in ministry, sustaining them in ministry. So those are the three things we're going to talk about during our time. I'm going to have a few questions throughout this presentation, and I want you to talk at your tables with the questions. But I'll go through a little bit of information, and then we'll have questions throughout. So this is a quote I want to read to you. It says, "We shouldn't sit back and wait for people to feel called to gospel work, any more than we should sit back and wait for people to become disciples of Christ in the first place. We should be active in seeking, challenging, testing suitable people to be set apart for gospel work. If the current generation of pastors and ministers is responsible for calling and choosing and setting apart the next generation, we need to be constantly on the lookout for the sort of people with the gifts and integrity to preach the word and pastor God's people. And there is some incredible ministry talent in our churches, people with extraordinary gifts in leadership and communication and management, people with vision, energy, intelligence, and entrepreneurial spirit, people who are good with people and who can understand and articulate ideas persuasively. If these people are also godly servants of Christ who long for his kingdom, then why not headhunt them for a life of recognized gospel ministry?" I love that. Because for so long, ministry was seen as if you can do anything else, do that before you do ministry. And what Tony and Colin are arguing for is, no, the people in your churches that have gifting, anointing, their heart breaks for the church, they love people, they're persuasive, they're entrepreneurial. Like, those people, those are the people that might have a call of God on their life to go into ministry. And so why wouldn't you have a conversation with them? Why wouldn't you cast that vision over them? Hey, I see these qualities in you. And I love that. When it comes to reaching people, a few thoughts came to mind. Prayer, giving a clear invitation, an ICNU conversation, or gifts exploration, and then Christian camps and retreats can be really, really helpful avenues for this. But first I want to talk about prayer. Matthew 9:36, I'm sure you've heard this before. It says, when he saw the crowds, Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, and then what does Jesus say? Therefore, okay, can we say it like we mean it? Right. Therefore what? Pray earnestly, not haphazardly, not occasionally, not half-heartedly, earnestly. Pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. I want to ask you a question. How often are you praying Some of you might be like, I pray daily. That's great. I'll tell you, when I talk to most church leaders, that's not their response. There's power in us being able to, what's it? Red. Red's not good. There's power in us individually saying, hey, I'm going to pray for this individually as a person who's been changed by Jesus and cares about the church. But also, there's a power in praying corporately as a church body for this, right? I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things is a lot of people in our church, I'm just talking about in our church, the church I attend, a lot of people in our church have no idea that there's a shortage of young people going into ministry, but the pastors I talk to desperately know that there's a shortage of young people going into ministry. And to be able to get the people in your church to care deeply about this, to have that conviction, right? It's part of culture creation, is being able to get a group of people in your church to be able to pray actively for this, earnestly for this, to say we care about the future of the church. We're going to pray that God brings workers for the harvest field, I think is powerful. It shapes culture. It puts it on the forefront of minds. You know what ends up happening then is some person leaves your church and they go, you know what? What about that, that young man in our youth group? I wonder if God's calling him to ministry. I've seen that happen in all sides of churches where simply saying we're going to pray for this. There's one church that I know that they do youth Sundays where they have students on stage and students preach, and they'll take a time in the service to pray for the future leaders of the church. I think it's so compelling because it rises into the surface of your mind. Give a clear invitation. This pastors are notoriously bad at. Okay, I was bad at this as a pastor. I think one of the things we do is we feel really uncomfortable asking someone or inviting someone to consider ministry. We feel like, well, I don't want to burden them, or they might not respond well, or they might have other thoughts in their mind, or I don't want to pressure them. But it can be as simple as this. This was a youth pastor in my kind of network of friends sent this to one of his students. He says, hey, I really appreciate how you always contribute to our conversations in small group, how compassionate you are. You've been actively applying scripture to your life. If you're interested, I'd love to have a conversation with you about leading in our small group ministry. I will walk with you along the way, mentoring you in faith and leadership. What do you think? He said that to a 10th grade boy in our youth group. And the youth group boy was like, I don't know what that means, but sure, if you feed me or give me Starbucks, I'm there. And that was it, right? It's just like this domino effect where all it took was one invite. It was just like one clear invitation to say, hey, would you join me? And I'm telling you right now, that student at First Christian, where I attend church, not this one's great, right? In Tennessee, that student is now leading among his peers a small group because that youth pastor sent this text to a student and had a conversation. Right? It's as simple as that. We have to get rid of the mystery, like the mystique of an ask, and be able just to simply say, hey, have you thought about this? Why don't you do this? Why don't you join me? What do you think about this? I think one of the things that we have to do is as pastors, and I've had to learn to grow in this boldness, but we have to speak prophetically over people. Like when we see something, when we sense something, we have to be able to say, I can just see this in your life. I see these qualities in your life. It goes to an I see in you conversation. Have you heard that phrase before? I see in you conversation. Okay. So if you're not familiar with this phrase, basically what it means is in an I see you conversation, you're calling out greatness in another person, and you're kind of recognizing their potential. So it could be something like this, I see in you blank. And then you provide whatever affirmations that you see character-wise or competency-wise within them, right? So I see in you this ability. I mean, you have grown in an amazing way. Or you are such a high person. Everybody feels amazing when they're around you. Or you are incredible, being able to take a really, really complicated truth and distill it down into a way where everybody can understand it. Or you're so compassionate. You have this ability to make people feel seen and heard. Like being able to have a conversation with someone in your church, a young person, to be able to call that out is incredible. And I've had the opportunity at Milligan, just in a few interactions with some students, they're at kind of like a crux moment, to be able to have some of those conversations. And I'm telling you, I just don't think we have enough of those. As leaders in the church, as elders, we don't have enough of those conversations where we call something out on somebody that they can't see themselves. Dave Ferguson, maybe you've heard that name before, is a pastor at Community Christian and leads an organization called Exponential, a church planting organization. He wrote this book called Hero Maker, and here's what he says about ICU conversations. He says, "We encourage everyone. You don't have to serve in any official capacity to practice this. I can't stress enough what a difference it makes when someone you respect takes the time to see something in you and call that out of you. Many people didn't grow up in a family in which they experienced this, nor do they work in an environment where they experience this. Our ICNU culture, is talking about a community, helps those who are affirmed to dare to dream that they can, in fact, be more and do more." I think that's true in our churches, right? Simply carving out the time, having enough margin to call out from someone giftings or competency or character that's within them is a gift. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, at your tables, answer this question. Looking back on your early years in ministry, I want you to share a story of how someone had an ICNU conversation with you. Whatever ministry looks like, even if you are an elder and you work in a different field, a professional field, but you felt a call to ministry as an elder, what conversation did you have in your past where someone was able to call out positive characteristics, traits within you, and bring it to the surface? Okay, we're going to take like 3 minutes, have that conversation, we'll circle back. Ready, set, break. All right. So real quick, maybe we could hear just one or two real quick ICNU stories that came from your tables. Feel free, anybody who wants to share, just maybe one or two stories of how someone had a conversation with you where they called out character or competency within you that changed your trajectory, whether that's as an elder or as a minister. Feel free, anybody who wants to share. Be brave.
I was a young guy. I was volunteering at a local youth outreach, and I was just moving shares and stuff like that, and someone would thank me for my ministry. Just for that time. Thank you. And tell my children. But yeah, that's where it all started. It was just, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for ministry. Calling what I thought was volunteer work ministry. Made something click.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else?
Well, I'll tell you the opposite.
Okay.
I was called at 14, and no one encouraged me to do it up to that point. And then my parents all stayed with me. But I spent my whole career believing you need to be called in ministry if you want to stay in ministry. So I never really encouraged people, young people. Said, you can do something else. We need good lay people in the church. At least one person ignored me. That's hearing this and living these days. If we don't do what you're talking about, there's not enough calling going on, or at least people not hearing the call.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Dennis. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so it was a DHF conference like 20 years ago. I was with Al Rennert, and I was leading the youth ministry breakout, and I was just sharing my story and kind of sociological, psychological evidence of this apparently. So there's this understanding that a young person's going to gravitate actually to the oldest person who's willing to treat them with dignity and respect. And so I'm not looking at anyone, but if you think, because you're not 22 and fresh out of Milligan and the cool whatever, right, the Jesse Youth Minister, that's going to make a difference, you're wrong. And the reason I went to Milligan, so the most influential people in my life were also the three oldest, of which the oldest, Dr. Jim Rice, who was a trustee at Milligan, challenged me to pick up Milligan, and well, now here I am. So
That's great.
yeah,
That's a good word of encouragement. Challenge for all of us. All right. I want to talk to you about, we're going to keep going. I know I've got about 20 minutes. So I want to talk to you about the second. So we talked about reaching people who, might have a call of God on their life or ministry. I want to talk to you a little bit about the preparation of somebody. I put this as a discipling conversation because I do believe all of us are called to make disciples, like what Cam shared earlier, right? The Great Commission, you see in Matthew 28. We're called to do that. And as you're preparing a person for ministry, it's really important. Now, kind of what Dennis was sharing, I've heard people who weren't resourced going into ministry, and God has been good to them and favored them. I will tell you, as someone who's sat with a lot of pastors, that it is helpful for someone to be able to receive all sorts of opportunities and resources and relationships and experiences to ensure that they're in ministry for the long haul. And so a few of those that I listed out here. First is Bible college and or seminary. I'm biased, right? I'll just tell you that. I'm biased. I went to Milligan and went to Emmanuel, so had a really positive experience. It was helpful for my ministry. Community or mentorship. We're going to talk about that in a second. Internships, residencies, books and videos, and then just some ministry experiences. For me, Christian education was really critical because it took the best of academia and it took my love of the church and just intersected in a really sweet spot. And I would tell you that's when schools are like the best, is when they're able to take rigorous, academic study and they're able to take that longing to care well for God's church and merge those together. And so for me, that was a benefit. I know for some of you and for some of the people in your churches, that would be a benefit. I want you to think about this, and we can just open this up. I want you to ask yourself the question, and just speak up whenever something comes to mind. What sort of community do you think a rising minister needs to maintain a sense of well-being? What are some of the relationships that you think a young minister would need to be able to thrive in ministry? And we just call it out.
Older minister.
Okay, an older minister as like a mentor?
Yeah.
Okay, so like a mentoring relationship. What else?
Peer.
A peer. Okay, so a peer relationship. What else?
People they can trust.
Okay, so a confidant, right? Someone that might be beyond their ministry context that is able to help them process through ministry, right? Because sometimes your own individual context where you're at might not be the safest place to do that, right? What else?
Someone to disciple.
Okay, so someone that they're investing in, right? And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter how old the rising minister is. We have people in our church, kids in our church, that are 14 years old that are discipling a 9-year-old. One of our ministry students, Hannah Bonds, who is great, from the great state of Indiana, where I'm from, she is discipling my 8-year-old daughter, Elsie, in the classroom every week. How cool is it to be going, one of my ministry students is discipling my child. And it's like this weird, like, God's economy, the way things work out, it's so cool. But that is a huge part of it, is someone that you're investing in. One thing I would say, too, as a relationship is a young minister's relationship with the elders of a church, or the church more broadly, is really important. Because for them, for a lot of young ministers, this is their first rodeo. And so to be able to be affirmed by elders, I remember my first position at First Christian Johnson City, I had a few elders that would go out of their way to take me out to lunch and just say, hey, I'm an accountant, I'm not a minister, but I'm an elder here, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I just remember being like, this breathed life into me, that someone that was as important as an elder of our church would buy me lunch as a poor college student, and just speak life into me. That just like gave me the courage to go another 6 months, another year. So I think that those are all relationships that are critical for, go ahead.
I've only been in ministry 4 years. Key word I see up there, what sort of community? I've really found that the community, not just individual relationships, but being involved in maybe Kiwanis and some of the community events brings an aspect that allows you to serve and escape. I mean, your context of ministry changes, but you're still able to serve within it, and that helps me to be able to see the church through a different lens when I see the community and how that service works.
That's a great word. I mean, even being able to have a good sense of mission for your neighbors, right? People that might not be in your church, but they are your neighbors. So I think that you're spot on. I want to, real quick at your tables, we'll just do maybe 2 minutes of this. What leadership opportunities right now exist in your church for either young people or second career folks to develop their character and ministry capabilities? So think about what opportunities, what can a young person do at your church that would help them develop their character and their ministry capacity? Right, good? We know what the question is. We're going to take 2 minutes, ready, set, break.
Yeah.
This is the first chunk of it. I know I did.
But what were some of the things that came to the surface of opportunities for a young person or a second career person to be able to engage at your church, to grow in their character, their followership of Jesus, and their ministry capacity? What were some of the things that were mentioned? I know we mentioned youth band was part of that, so being able to have like a youth band, mission trips got mentioned. What are some other things that came up?
Not much.
Not much? Okay, all right. I appreciate the honesty, yeah.
We talked about, there's been, we have mentoring programs in our, and in my experience with that, it is developing you as a person, character traits, understanding yourself better, just being a better Christian, developing you, understanding yourself to be a more well-rounded whole Christian. And then it does ask you, we kind of talked about how then where are you going to serve? But the language you're using is different. In that can come across as where are you going to sign up? Where the language you're using, I think, represents that. They're kind of one and the same, but it's different. Does that make sense, or do you hear the difference?
Sure. You're saying, I'm going to try to articulate what you said. Tell me if I'm saying, if I'm correctly
I want to hear how you heard it.
No. Instead of it being, hey, we're talking with someone, mentoring them in their faith, and then go sign up for a
Where we have a
need.
need, go put your name down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Being able to almost instead say, hey,
And,
we're going to develop you and figure out what call God might have in your life,
yeah.
regardless of us trying to fill in spots.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes,
Okay.
that's fair, but that's kind of,
Okay.
yeah.
And that's a great insight and learning that I would say can shape how you invest in a next-gen leader. So for a good amount of the churches that we work with at Milligan and Emmanuel, one of the things that's been really helpful is an internship program or a fellowship program. And what we often do is we pair undergraduate or graduate students with a church where they're able to gain some like hands-on practical ministry experience while also growing in their relationship with Jesus and their love of the church. And so maybe as an idea would be as you're trying to think about investing in the next generation of leaders, maybe that might be an idea that you go, hey, what would it look like for us, for some of the young people in our church? They might not say, hey, I want to be a preacher, but I know tech, like AV stuff got brought up at our table. I guarantee you there are some kids or some students in your church that are really interested in tech. It's like, hey, would you do an internship in helping us figure out how to live stream our services or how to do, AVL stuff, audio visual lighting stuff in our church? I've found a lot of students, like they respond well to that. Or students that might be interested in student ministry and just being able to tag along, and help organize youth group events. Those can be really, really helpful. We've seen a lot of kingdom benefit for our students from those kinds of experiences. I want to give you this quote, and we're going to keep moving, and then we'll have a tad amount of Q&A at the end. This is a quote from Jeff York. He says, leadership roles are God's laboratories for leaders. God places us where we are or may call us to a new place so he can have the perfect laboratory for continuing to change us into the image of Jesus. And I think it's so true, right? When you're in a leadership position, it reveals so much of you, right? Good and bad. It's a place where you are learning to be faithful to Jesus amidst challenges and circumstances. And I think that's true for students too. This is a quick leadership process. This is nothing new. The folks from Exponential kind of put this in their works. But a leadership process is simply helping someone through a process. If they're trying to learn how to do a sermon, right? Trying to learn how to preach, being able to say, hey, I'm going to preach, and I want you to watch, and we'll talk about it. And then maybe the second step is, I'm going to preach, you're going to help me, and then we'll talk about it. Third step might be, I want you to preach, I'll help you in the preaching, and then we'll talk. And the fourth step could be, you're going to preach, I'm going to watch, and then we'll talk about it. And the fifth step I would add on to this is, now that person goes and teaches the next person, right? They do the same process. It's kind of a domino effect, exponential effect, right? But this could be done in a billion different ways. I've done this with students on difficult conversations, right? Hey, you're gonna step in with me, you're gonna watch a difficult conversation happen, right? And then the difficult conversation you need to have in your life, right? I want you to have that conversation. We'll be able to talk about it. But you can do this in a whole bunch of different ways of ministry, a whole bunch of different opportunities. These are some resources that I just want to share with you. Some of these are folks that I know. Disciples Made is a great one if you're looking for content to help shape a person in the image of Jesus. Brian Phipps and team, Rob Wigner, who's great, he's out there. They've made a whole bunch of discipleship curriculum there in Kansas City. Lead Like Jesus, Live Like Jesus, who's Dan Spader, who's Southeast Christian for a long time. Rooted, to me, you might have heard of Rooted before. Navigators, Francis Chan wrote a curriculum called Multiply. All of these are materials that as you're trying to help develop a young leader spiritually, these can be resources that you call back to or utilize. All right, real quick, we're going to talk about sending leaders, and then I'll stop talking. We'll do a bit of Q&A. One of the books I would encourage you to read, if you're concerned about the state of ministers and being able to keep ministers in the game of ministry for the long haul, is a book called Flourishing in Ministry by Matt Bloom. He is a professor at Notre Dame who has written a lot about well-being for ministers. But one of the things he says is, we know this in election, he says burnout among pastors is real and has real consequences, right? You have people that are in helping professions, pour themselves into their work, have very little boundaries, pressures from congregants, they're emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted. It's easy to grow in your cynicism or jadedness, right? And so he gives a couple things that are really important to sustain someone in ministry for the long haul. First is physical relaxation, just the idea that your body is a body, right? God made you as a person, and being able to understand what it takes to care for your body. Detachment, which I would say is healthy boundaries. Anybody here have a hard time with saying no or boundaries, turning your phone off? No, none of you would at all, right? You're all elders and pastors. Restorative niches, this is an issue. This is, what do you enjoy doing that God gave you as a gift, but you don't find the time to do it? It could be as simple as playing a guitar, going on a walk with your spouse, being able to throw a baseball around, going kayaking, simple stuff like that. Spiritual disciplines, which are core spiritual disciplines. How many of you here have felt the conundrum of, I have to prepare a sermon